There's a sentence that came down that has millions of people divided. 35 years. And in the middle of that reaction, a voice with a platform, a lot bigger than a courtroom, decided to make it about something else entirely. Listen in.
But for all the goofies, what we need to be discussing is how Karmelo Anthony just got a 35-year life sentence. This is a young brother that was never arrested before, clean record. They brought the pressure to him. What about that?
You just heard a man react to a teenager facing decades in prison for one act of violence and one moment of rage, and frame it like a war being waged against him and people who look like him and me. He called anyone who disagreed with him a goofy. So, for the rest of this show, that's exactly what we're going to call Rick Ross, the goofy. Before I go further, you should know something about me. I spent years of my legal career as a music attorney. I know these lyrics are not accidents. Rick Ross is not an accident. We know his history. He's no thug. The lyrics, I know they're written, produced, and released on purpose. And I know the law protects every word of it. It's art, so they say, and as commerce. So here's what's coming next. And there's an explicit content warning attached to it. Here it is, in cold blood. Title of the song. Rick Ross. Run with me or run from me. Don't get. Yeah. I murdered all of my foes. Killing. 20K. Will get your grandmammy pinned to the ceiling. Midst of the war, I piss on graves. Kids get grazed by my piss poor ways. Never could imagine it living with paralysis. Shoulda checked your rear view. Made a better analysis. Whack. Yayo caught him slipping while he snort dust. Cold. Blood bullet. Hit him like a tour bus. Rick Ross. One young man gets 35 years for one moment. This goofy gets richer, describing that same violence over and over for a living. Somebody tell me which one of them is actually paying a consequence. We're calling this episode The Poison That Smells Good, featuring the goofy. This is the Mark Little Show. I am Mark Little. I'm your host. I'm a pastor. I am a lawyer and a political commentator. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Mark Little Show. I am Mark Little. I'm your host. I'm a pastor, I'm a lawyer, and a political commentator. We're still working through the poison that smells good. And the man we're calling the Goofy, Rick Ross. So let's get into the actual facts. Because his version and the real record are two very different things. April 2nd, 2025. A track meet in Frisco, Texas. An argument over a seat and location of where Karmelo Anthony should be. It turned physical. Karmelo Anthony, 17 at the time, stabbed 17-year-old Austin Metcalf once in the chest. Metcalf dies at the hospital that same day. Anthony's defense argued self-defense, that he was shoved first and feared for his safety. The prosecution argued something different. Their line to the jury was simple. You don't get to meet a shove with a stab. That's not self-defense. That's an escalation that ends a life. This wasn't a quiet case decided in an afternoon. The trial ran 4 days. The state alone called 21 witnesses. Jurors heard from the medical examiner about the wound itself, a 2-inch stab straight to the heart. They heard from students who were at that stadium, some describing tension building well before anyone touched anyone else. Anthony did not take the stand in his own defense, and that cannot be held against him either. The case had already drawn a gag order from the judge and national attention long before the verdict. And that included reported threats and harassment directed at the people connected to both families. This was never a small local story. And by the time the jury got it, everybody in the courtroom knew the whole country was watching. In June of this year, the jury agreed with the prosecution. They found Karmelo Anthony guilty of murder and gave him 35 years to life. Here, my friends, is the legal reality. There is a reality behind that number. I want you to know and understand, I'm speaking as a lawyer, not just a headline. Self-defense in Texas requires proportional force. You don't get to respond to a shove with a blade to the chest and call it self-defense of your own life. That jury had the option to consider manslaughter, a much lighter sentence. They also could have found sudden passion, which under Texas law can reduce a murder charge if the defendant proves he acted in immediate heat of an adequate provocation. They didn't go there either. 12 people sat through every hour of that testimony. and called it, Rick, exactly what the prosecution called it: murder, unjustified. That comes with a penalty. That's the outcome. Cold, factual, decided by a jury, not by a comment section. Now let's talk about how the goofy decided to talk about it. You heard the clip at the top of the show. A framing of this verdict as a war on young black men. If you go and listen to the whole clip, you'll get the gist. A dismissal of anyone processing this differently as, in his words, a goofy, which again is exactly why I'm using it right back at him in this episode. And I want to be careful because there is a real and serious conversation about how the justice system has historically treated black defendants. That's not what this is about. And that conversation deserves better than being waved away. It has weight. It has history. But that is not what happened in that courtroom in Collin County. A jury heard 4 days of testimony, heard from the medical examiner, heard from witnesses on both sides, and reached a verdict on the specific facts of this specific case. Turning that outcome into evidence of a war erases the actual young man who died, and it erases the actual legal standard that was applied. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for me, because I've watched this pattern sitting on the other side of the table in the music business. When something inconvenient happens in the real world, the industry rarely examines its own fingerprints. It just reframes the moment, redirects the anger outward, and moves on to the next album release. The goofy didn't invent that playbook. He's just the latest one running it, following his orders. That reframing, it matters because it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening from a platform with real reach. And it's happening from an industry that has built decades of wealth, selling the exact behavior it now claims to be horrified by, watching land somebody in prison. Let me put my lawyer hat on all the way for a moment, because there's an irony here that most commentary on this story is missing entirely. Start with the basics. Song lyrics are protected speech under the First Amendment, the same as a novel, a painting, or a film. The government can't restrict expression based on its content or its viewpoint, except in a handful of narrow categories: obscenity, true threats, incitement to imminent violence. Violent lyrics, no matter how graphic, almost never meet that bar. That's settled law. And honestly, It should stay settled law. I'm not arguing for censorship here. In 2022, California, no surprise, went a step further and passed a law called the Criminalizing Artistic Expression Act. It requires prosecutors who want to use an artist's own lyrics as evidence in a criminal trial to first prove in a hearing outside the jury's presence that those lyrics are actually relevant, not just prejudicial. There's a federal version sitting in Congress right now called the RAP Act, aiming to do something similar nationwide. I understand why that law exists. There's a real pattern of prosecutors reaching for a rap lyric as a shortcut to prove intent or gang affiliation when a country singer or a novelist would never face the same scrutiny for the exact same subject matter in their work. That's a legitimate concern, and reasonable people, including serious legal scholars and civil liberty advocates, support protecting artistic expression from being weaponized in a courtroom. I've made versions of that argument myself in rooms where a client's freedom depended on it. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Same legal system extending that protection to lyrics about murder, drug trafficking, beating women, casual violence against bystanders. It's the same system that just sentenced a real 19-year-old to 35 years for one act of real violence. One is protected as art and commerce. The other is prosecuted as a felony. And the industry making enormous sums of money selling the aesthetic of the first is the same industry positioning itself as now the moral voice reacting to the second. That's not a contradiction that I'm inventing. That's the plain legal and financial reality sitting right in front of us. The poison gets First Amendment protection. The consequence of that poison gets 35 years and no attorney in the building to soften it. We're calling this one the poison that smells good, featuring the Goofy. And after the break, we're going to talk about who actually pays for it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Mark Little Show. I am Mark Little. I'm your host. I'm a pastor, I'm a lawyer, and I'm a political commentator. We're back with the poison that smells good. And we're still talking about the Goofy. So let's ask the actual question underneath all of this. Who gets to have consequences? A 19-year-old with a clean record, by his own defense's account, made one decision in one moment of rage. And it will cost him 35 years of his life. That's real. That's not in dispute. Meanwhile, an entire catalog of music, glorifying that same kind of violence, contract killings, casual harm to bystanders, has made careers, made fortunes, made men ride around in their Rolls Royces, worth more than most people's homes. No indictment, no trial, no 35 years. Just royalty checks and another concert and another verse. I'm not saying those are the same thing. They're not. One is a real killing with a real victim. The other is a recording. But I'm saying this. If we're going to have an honest conversation about violence in the Black community and about who actually pays for it, we can't exempt the people profiting from teaching it while we prosecute the ones who acted it out. And here's the part that should bother you more than the profit motive. The poison doesn't stay in the song. It gets absorbed. It becomes a soundtrack a teenager hears at a party, in a car, on a phone, 100 times, before he ever finds himself in a moment of real conflict. Nobody hands him a contract. Nobody hands him a legal team with a decades-long track record of keeping artists out of trouble. He just gets the consequence. Alone, the goofy gets a plaque for sales, gets a car show, gets a concert. Is it about profit? For sure. Nobody in this industry is producing content like this by accident. It sells. And selling is the entire business model. The poison sells because it's packaged well. It rides in nice cars. It wears nice jewelry. It smells good going down. And that's exactly the problem. But I'll leave you with a harder question than the profit motive. Because I think the profit motive is actually the easy answer. Could there be something more intentional happening? Could the degradation itself, not just the profit from it, be part of the design? I don't know that. I'm not going to stand here and claim I do. But I've been inside these transactions. I've sat across the table from these deals. I'm telling you, the disconnect between a man condemning a courtroom verdict and the catalog that built his fortune is too clean, too complete to be an accident. Somebody has to ask, who benefits when an entire generation, Goofy, grows up on that soundtrack? And one of them finally acts it out for real. Because when he does, the industry that taught him the words won't serve a single day for it. It'll just release the next verse. The Goofy can call this whatever he wants. I'm calling it the poison that smells good but kills nonetheless. And I'm calling him exactly what he called us. I'm Mark Little. I said it. And until next time, be blessed.